On May 5th, Steelwolf Studios shared an in-game poster for Secret of the Mimic in celebration of their Mimic Mondays. It features a man with bandages on his hand and text warning employees to watch their hands. This had people thinking, what's up with all the hand imagery? And I decided to put in my 2 cents. The player will likely lose their hand sometime in Secret of the Mimic. Side tangent, if they do lose their hand, I think that would make VR mode a lot more challenging and fun, where you only have to play with one hand. But another tangent, this could all be a red herring, similar to how a lot of people thought that Mommy Longlegs from Puppy Playtime Chapter 2 was going to get burned at the end of the chapter because of a couple of posters. First off, you could say that they are just employee posters warning of danger and explaining the rules. Like the one with the girl with half of her hair removed as a warning, possibly referencing Lucia from the Tales from the Pizzaplex epilogues. But it's the excessive amount of hand imagery in the promotion for Secret of the Mimic that has caught my eye. At PAX, a lot of posters were revealed. Among those was a warning of exposed wiring showing a hand getting shocked. Another poster showed a new character, which I have dubbed Need a Hand. It's this hippie octopus thing. Again, pushing the themes of hands. But let's take a step outside of the VR booth. At PAX West, there was a replica of the facade used for the Five Nights at Freddy's movie. And blocking the door was a severed hand. Another thing I noticed is that during the Guess the Sketch era that Steelwolf had back in 2023, some of them had significance. One of them was the Jack in the Box mascot, which I guess was supposed to hit towards Jackie, and another one of a Resident Evil key, which looks a lot like one of the fancy keys in the new Data Diver poster that we got. One of the Guess the Sketches was Combat Carl from Toy Story Terror. One of his most defining features is that he doesn't have a hand, and since we know that some of these are meant to be foreshadowing, this could also be used as evidence. All this to allude that something will happen to the player's hand, or hands. The poster from earlier for Mimic Mondays also mentions their hand being replaced. But before we get into that, how will the player lose their hand? I think that near the end, when the Mimic is revealed and possibly contained, depending on how this game will end, that the Mimic will rip off the player's hand. I know it sounds pretty gruesome, but the game was rated T for teen for violence. Not fantasy violence, but straight up violence. The only other game to get this was Into the Pit back in August of 2024. And that game had actual corpses in it, kind of like what we're seeing in Secret of the Mimic, with a corpse being stuffed inside one of the elephant costumes and possibly inside of Tiger Rock. But I really like this other theory by creator Vomited Thoughts. You may know them as the creator of the real-life Mimic animatronic that went viral a couple months ago. Again, I really like their theory on this, that Dolly will amputate the hand, or bite it off, as they say in their tweet. Also, yeah, Dolly mentioned for the 3rd time in these videos. Yeah, I just heard all 3 of Dolly's fans clap. You know who you are. This would actually play into the nurse gimmick that Dolly has, since, you know, she is a nurse and is speculated to be the carnival nurse from Help Wanted 2. I mentioned that last video as well. But if Dolly ends up being an ally, which she probably won't the way that she's walking towards the player in the trailer, if Dolly does end up being an ally, I think that she will replace our hand with some sort of prosthetic. In the Mimic Mondays poster, it does say that limbs are replaced at employees' expense. So that could probably mean like a reduction from your paycheck. I don't know, I'm unemployed. But again, replaced. So I think that Dolly will most likely, if she ends up being an ally, replace the player's hand with a prosthetic, so you don't walk around the whole game bleeding out of what used to be your hand. And yet again, she has shown experience with amputation and prosthetics in the first aid levels for Help 1 and 2, if the theory of her being the carnival nurse ends up being true. So, in conclusion, I theorize that the player will lose their hand sometime in Secret of the Mimic, either by Dolly or the Mimic itself. Those are my thoughts, and I want to hear yours. Make sure to like and subscribe, and tell me what you think in the comments. Do you think the player will lose their hand, and if so, by who? Make sure to pre-order Five Nights at Freddy's Secret of the Mimic before it releases on June 13th, and I will see you guys later. Bye-bye.